closures by hand, right? This is just an easy way, like an industry standard, to finish most garment with lining. Okay, so basically you sew the shell. Okay, make sure that you have identified the hem, press it flat, right? Also the hemline for the sleeve. Okay, we have 2 inches here. It's all folded in, okay? And then this side also folded in. Okay. Now you finish your lining. So you finish the shell, and then you finish the lining separately, okay, with your facing in place. Okay, for your sleeves, the sleeves would normally be about half an inch longer than your shell sleeve, right? When the hemline is folded, okay? So you don't cut it as the same as your self, okay? You fold in the, so basically this is the sleeve hemline, right? Which is your wrist, right? Folded in. Now your lining has to be about half an inch longer than it to give you more ease, okay? So once you have that in place, okay, you stitch everything complete. For the sleeve, you leave about 6 inches to 7 inches gap, okay, in your undersleeve, okay? So your underarm, the stitch, you leave about 6 to 7 inches gap in there, right? So that we can have access to the inside of the garment, right? Okay. Now, the first step would be for us to join our center front, right? I'm only going to stitch one side, okay? So we match our center front, okay, right side to right side. Okay, and we're going to attach the self to the face, right? Okay, back tag. Match the hemline. Now, it doesn't matter what type of closure you're doing for the bottom, right? You can always use flat. Under normal circumstance, we'll do an understitch, right? I'm not gonna understitch this because I have to take it out. Okay, I want to give myself over. So we will understitch on the facing, right? Okay, and then we will stitch the opposite side too. Okay, we can stitch that one. will be tight. Now we turn it inside out. So now we have the two fronts attached, right? If you have a collar, you will work on the collar now, right? So let's say, doesn't matter what color you're working with. If you had a collar attached, you would, actually let me just stitch the collar. Okay, we work on the collar. Okay, right sides together. Always when you stitch, you have to always double check to make sure that it's matching what you stitched, right? So let's say we attach the front, right sides together and we stitch, right? You have to put it back together to how the garment will finish, like, and then check before you continue, right? You don't want to finish sewing and then you realize that, oh, you matched the wrong front to the wrong side, okay? So I'm just going to stitch the neck, okay? Yours is has a lapel or a collar, you have to do all that, right? Basically, you do the center front, you do the neckline, then we do the hemline, and then we move on to the sleeves. Okay? Make sure that you're matching all your seams. So we have our fronts attached, our neckline attached. So now we have our hemline and then our sleeve to finish, right? I'm going to bring out my sleeve. Okay, look for my slit. Okay, so we have our slit in here, right? I'm just gonna go through it, okay, to catch my hem, right? Go through it, catch my hand. Now, if your jacket is too heavy, right? It's too heavy that you kind of pull through the armhole, you would finish the hemline first before you go to the neck. Because your neck has a much wider opening, right? So you can get to the hemline from the neck easier than from the sleeve, okay? So if your coat or your jacket is very big, you do the hemline first, well, you do the center fronts first, then you do your hemline, then you do your neck, and then your sleeve. Okay? So I'm just gonna go through my sleeve. Can you guys see what I'm doing here? Okay, so I'm going through the sleeve, right? And I'm just going to catch my hemline, okay? With my lining. I'm just going to pull it through the hole. Okay, so basically I'm turning it inside out again. Okay? Okay, so now we can finish the hemline. Okay? So now this is my center front. The hemline is half an inch seam allowance, normally you would stitch on the lining because the lining is shorter than the self, right? The lining is shorter than the self because the lining pulls the hemline up, right? But at the same time, it gives you a little bit of fullness, okay? So, the facing to the self is normally half an inch, okay? Because you don't want bulkiness in there, okay? But from the lining going, can be about half an inch shorter than the self, okay? So now the center front we stitch straight, right? The center front is straight, right? Then when you get to where the facing is, okay, we pivot in an angle. So let's say, okay, the lining is shorter than the self, right? Because the back, you want the back to sit above the hemline, right? You don't want the lining to match the self, so you will pull the lining up a bit, right? So this is shorter than this, about half an inch, okay? This is the line, this is your hemline, right? Okay, but when you get to this point, we want to match the lining to the self so that it can actually pull it up, right? Okay, so when you get to the point where the facing intersects with the self, okay, up with the lining, right? We just match the lining, okay, to our hemline, okay, or the facing for the hemline, okay, we match it, then we just pivot, okay, back to the half an inch seam allowance, okay. So you want, in order for this to work, your lining has to be shorter than yourself, right? Okay, so hemline matches. Try and match all your seam allowances. So we stitch. Okay, remember that the facing to the self is half an inch seam allowance. Okay, you can finish those two sides before you even do the attach the lining to the self. So I'm just gonna put a pin to keep it in place, right? Okay, so I stitch down. Okay, now when you get into the end, remember we pivot, right? So I'm just gonna angle it half an inch. Okay. Back to the half an inch on the face, okay? Now it goes straight all the way. Okay, put it on the table. Let's put it there. So the center front, right, self to facing is straight, right? We want the center front to be straight. Now the lining is shorter than the hemline facing, right? So when you're cutting, you make sure that your lining is shorter than the self, right? About half an inch to an inch, because you want the lining to sit above the hemline, right? So we make it shorter. However, when we are stitching, we match the edges, okay, so that it will naturally pull it up, right? So we stitch straight here, then from here we match the hemline and the lining together. We come back to the 1/2 inch here, right? And we stitch all the way. When we get to this point, we angle it, okay? We can stitch here, so basically you can stitch here first, okay? Then match your lining to your hemline and just stitch around it, okay, at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Any questions? Okay, so when we are done, remember we pressed our hemline, right? So we have that already. So we're just gonna move it up, okay, and tack on these seams. Okay, any questions? Okay. So now we fold our hemline up because we have already pressed it, right? So we know where it's sitting. Okay. Then I'm just going to catch on the hemline fold and on the side seams. Okay. If you have multiple seams, you have to join all the seams, right? You have to basically tack them together. Okay. So we match that. Okay. Hemline seam. Make sure that you have folded your hemline on the pressed seam, okay, so that it's even and straight. Okay, and then we're just going to tack on the seams. Okay, one seam is fine. Make sure that when you're tacking, your stitch does not pass the 1/2 inch hemline stitch. Okay, you want your tack to stay above your hemline stitch, right where you attach the lining to the silk. Okay, so same thing here. Match it. Doesn't matter which one you tack on, right? There are 2 seams. Doesn't matter which one you tack. It's fine. Okay. Now, if your hemline, if let's say your seams are far apart, right? The seams are far apart, something like this. What you would do is you would cut your wool fuse into 2, right? Let's take these 2 pieces as an example. So wool fuse, right? Right side to right side. So the glue side is here, the glue side is here, right? Then you use your blind hammer. Okay, just run multiple stitches on just to bond it together. Okay, then you put it here where you would normally fuse your hemline. Okay, put it underneath and then press it together. Okay. Now that bonds it together, and because you use the blind hammer, okay, blind hammer moves, right? It doesn't make it stiff, so your hemline is still able to have room to move around.
There's also this hem tape, like where it's like
double-sided.
Yeah, double-sided.
Yeah, don't ever use that. So the double-sided tape, it's very stiff, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say when you bond it and there's even like 1/16 or 1/8 off, it's just gonna form a pleat on the outside. Okay, so when you use the blind hammer, or you can just base stitch the 2 pieces together, just make sure that the right side to right side is together and you have the glue side exposed, right? So when you use that on, now let's say if you're off by an 8 or a 16, because your blind hem is able to move, right? Because the blind hem stitch is quite loose, right? So it gives you that flexibility to move the hem. And you don't want anything to be tight, right? You want things to be loose, flexible. That's why we put in more ease in garments and all that, right? So don't make anything stiff, right? And then the glue too, with time, right? It weakens and then you're back to square one, okay? Any questions? Okay, so we've tacked. Okay. So now we have to turn our jacket inside out, right? So go through my sleeve hole again, and then I pull everything up. Okay. Okay. I turn it inside out. Okay. Okay, so this is how the finished fish looks like, right? You have your hemline straight. You still have your pleats in your lining. Okay, it's sitting above your hemline, right? And it's tagged so it's not pulling apart. Okay? Cool? Okay. So now we have to work on our sleeve. Okay. So first we bring our sleeve out. Okay. Then we fold our sleeve hemline. Okay. Now one thing you have to check is that you have to make sure that your lining seam is matching with your self seam. Okay. You don't want to match this seam to that seam, right? You want to make sure that it's straight, okay, and the seam is right on top of each other, okay? So you double check, make sure that it's straight, it's not twisted, okay? Then we go through our hole, right? We go down, we catch the self and the lining together, okay? Now, if you don't know how to catch it, basically what you can do is, this is clean finishing it, right? The hemline is clean finishing it. So I'm just gonna fold it up, okay? Like that. Okay, so this is how it's going to finish, right? Okay, so I'm just gonna put a pin to hold it. Right? I'm only catching the hem, the facing for the hemline, okay, and the lining, okay. I'm not catching the self, right? So I'm just going through the hole. Okay, so basically this is how it's going to finish. I'm going to go through my slit or hole, then catch those two seams together, right? So right here, right? Any questions? Cool. Okay. So I catch it, come up, and take my pin out, right? Make sure you're still holding it, okay? Now carefully match your seams, okay, and your edges, okay? The edges have to match and your seams have to match, okay? Now it's a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Match the edges, match your seams, okay? Now pull it, make sure that your lining and your facing is the same, right? If your lining is more looser than your facing, it means that your lining is off. You have to kind of take it in a bit, okay? So match it, 1/2 inch seam allowance, make sure the edges are matching. press our hemline for the sleeve, right? So before you start this, make sure that all your hemlines are pressed up, right? Both for the self and for the sleeve, okay? So I'm just gonna fold, okay? Check to make sure that the sleeve is not twisted or anything. Okay, we're gonna fold our sleeve up, our hemline, okay? Now the same thing we did to the self hemline, okay, we're just going to mark our seams, okay, and tack, right? Okay, make sure that your tack stays before your seam allowance, okay, or your seam stitch. I go on the opposite side. This has only one seam. Okay. Okay. So this you would apply the same method here, right? You put the two facings to two wool fuse together, and then line the hem, right, and then attach it. Because since there is no seam here, this is still gonna gape, right? So you want to make sure that you have attached the two pieces together. Okay, so now that comes out, okay, and our sleeve, okay, is finished, right? Okay, now in the tailoring class, we attach the lining and the self together at the armhole, right? Now for this, we're not going to do that, okay? However, we need to keep the seams in place so they don't move around a lot, right? So we need to attach a piece of lining. Give me a second, I'll be back.